Earlier this month, Blender announced an official MCP, which is a model context protocol. For those that don't know what that is, what it allows you to do is take an LLM, any LLM, not specifically just Claude, but any open source, even something that's run locally, and connect it with Blender's Python API to have things automated via Blender Python. This opens up the door for many things. It allows you to automate tedious tasks, such as deleting a bunch of things from a scene, or applying materials to many things, or even creating geometry node setups. Before I get into what this is capable of, I wanted to show pretty much the Blender Development Fund, because if you haven't donated already, you should. Anthropic did donate to Blender, but they pulled their credits from the corporate patron because it's no longer a yearly donation after a bunch of controversy. So they did just a one-time donation. And to me, it's strange how there's so much drama about this, especially on Twitter, because they are clearly not the first AI company to sponsor Blender. All the corporate Titanium sponsors are AI companies, as well as Intel, Meta, Hyper 3D, and even Meshi AI pulled out as well. I think that there's a lot of misinformation on what Claude can do for Blender. People are thinking it's going to take away their artistic creativity, but that's far from it. I just started with a quick demo. Pretty much up on top, you can see on the top left, I made a simple prompt. I wanted a grid of cubes and then a sphere on top. Whatever is closer to the sphere, the cubes will elevate, and whatever is not next to the cube will be in a resting position, and just make a quick geometry node setup out of that. So it was thinking for a little bit, and then it finished the output. By the way, the requirements for this is Blender 5.1. I'm using Claude, and Claude did donate to the Blender Development Fund, but that does not necessarily mean you specifically need to use Claude. You can use local models or any other LLM provider. Blender out the box doesn't have any LLM capabilities. That is why you need the MCP server as well as the add-on and your LLM client of choice. And the way this thing works is all it does is it writes a Python script right here, and it runs it inside Blender and executes it. You can see here is the result, and it works flawlessly. It one-shotted it right off the bat. Here's a geometry node setup. You can see that things are laid out pretty cleanly. I guess the only thing here is that the transform geometry node is covering the set position node, but other than that, this saved so much time, because to build this out manually would have taken probably 5 to 10 minutes depending on your skill level, and it is done already. Now I want to get into something more advanced. I work with point cloud stuff, so I do a bunch of point cloud animations in Blender. Let's see. I'm going to do this live. So I have a fresh Blender scene and a fresh Claude chat. I'm going to drag and drop one of my 3D models that I scanned a couple of years back. And from here, I'm just going to tell Claude what I want it to do. I want you to turn this 3D model that I just imported into Blender into a point cloud animation. I want you to set up the shading as well as the geometry node setup to turn it into a point cloud, as well as have it animated in a flowing way. Also set up the lighting and make sure it looks good in terms of framing with the camera, and just have a completed render ready for me. So I said what I wanted. Let's see what it comes up with. Let's see if it can do everything correctly. The thing is with Blender point clouds, there are some very specific workflows that even people that work regularly in Blender get confused in, especially with attributes. So let's see if it picks that up correctly. So it's still working on it, and what's interesting is that it's actually picking up on its own mistakes. I've seen some other YouTube videos where the output isn't quite right, so let's see if it hits it or it misses. So it's still working on the render, and what's interesting is it's actually doing renders by itself. It just changed. and then it's judging on how good the render looks and adjusting the camera position based off of that. So it's continuing to work. Let's see what the final result is. It's working still, so let's see. All right, so it finished. Let's take a look and see what it came up with. I can see right off the bat, but we can see it made some weird quirks with the noise, how it's a little bit small. The camera animation isn't really flowing through the scene. It's kind of just moving a little bit, but you can see on the left here, it mentioned all the nodes it did. So let's take a look at that setup right here. And it mentioned that it did do 3 noise textures, which is unnecessary. So I'm just gonna tell Claude what I want changed and then see what it comes up with. I'll do this one more round of changes, and then I want to see if it can handle something more advanced with point clouds and simulation nodes. So my impressions so far is that you're not using Claude to create scenes for you, but you're using it as a technical assistant to get certain things set up quickly or to modify certain things in the scene that are redundant or would take a long time manually. So let's say to Claude those changes. Okay, I'm looking at the geometry nodes result. Some few changes right here is that I don't want you to use instance on points. I want you to use the native Blender points. So no icospheres, just the point cloud primitive. And also instead of mesh to points, I want you to use distribute points on faces. And then for the set position node, please keep it with 1 noise texture. Also, I noticed in the render that the point displacement is moving kind of fast and the vectors aren't really displacing too much. So make it more of a flowing type of aesthetic rather than a chaotic aesthetic where everything is shaking in the same spot more or less. And then also, instead of using a point cloud material, I want you to use the shader that or texture that came with the 3D model. So that's the second prompt. Let's see what it does. Hopefully it does clean things up, but if not, I'm gonna move on to the simulation node test from here. So it seems to understand what I want from it. I'm going to just head back to layout and not spoil anything. See if anything changes from here. Oh, okay, so it's already working on the geometry nodes. So it's changing the points now. I noticed that it started with bigger points and it corrected it. Now the points are smaller. And as you can see on the left, it did mention that in its chat log. So let's see what it continues to come up with. I have to say, it is a little bit slow. I was expecting it to be faster. Maybe there is just a lot of people using Claude right now and tokens are loading slowly or something. I don't know. All right, so it seems like it settled on a final output. So it did improve on the flowing motion. So I'm just gonna make a few tweaks to the setup really quickly. Let's make the density 400 and we'll increase the point radius to 0.1. It also seemed to fail to add that set material node, so I'll do it for it. And it also seemed to miss the fact that with Blender point cloud stuff, but I really don't blame Claude, is that it uses an attribute of the UV map to make sure that the texture maps properly. So now it works fine, and then my signature BDSF shading setup. But aside from that, I'd have to say it did save a bit of time setting up the geometry nodes for me. Once again, some like weird stuff going on here with the combine XYZ. So after a few tweaks to the node setup, because it seems like Claude understands what the nodes are, but sometimes it messes up with putting everything together. I want to give it a final challenge, see if it works or not, because I'm curious myself. This is my first time playing around with it. Can it handle a simulation node setup? So I made some changes and I want you to make now a simulation node setup where we take a sphere and this can be controlled and moved around the scene. I want you to make a simulation node setup that the points from the 3D scan get attracted to this sphere if they get close enough, and then some sort of effect that happens, maybe changing the point's radius or color, And then from there, if the sphere gets far away enough, then it goes back to its original position. So be sure to use simulation nodes for that, because I will be having a sphere that I will be controlling manually in order to have this simulation run. Please don't do any renders. I just want you to work on this geometry node setup, and that's it. So my impressions of MCP and Blender, is it there yet? I think we're still far from it. For very specific things, as I mentioned before, getting specific geometry node setups, like that first example it did perfectly, and now this one it's struggling with. It totally won't replace, especially now and in its current state, most of the 3D work, but I do see this AI coming in to handle a lot of the repetitive tasks and things that 3D artists are frustrated by, and they feel like it's very redundant. AI can save them in that regard, but in terms of AI becoming the driver, we are far from that in terms of 3D software still. All right, so it was actually going for a bit, and I think it actually pulled it off. So it made this simulation node setup, and if I just hop into the viewport and run it, you can see that it actually built out the effect. So from here, what I could do is make some more changes to it, but I'm not going to do it in this video because it will get too long. But my whole point with this is that you can use Claude to set up things as a base for your setups for geometry nodes, or have it set up like a simulation setup. You're not making it do all your scenes for you. You're making it that it's doing just very specific things. You're telling it to do one specific thing, not make the whole animation for you. But like, if you're someone that doesn't even understand how simulation nodes work even, this is literally a game changer. Let me know what you guys thought about this one in the comments. I'll continue to experiment with the MCP connection and see what kind of stuff I do with it, because it looks really cool, especially because I'm working with all this computer vision research stuff that I didn't even talk about in this video. But I've been using Claude to write scripts to bring this very specialized point cloud data into Blender. So if you want to stay tuned for that, be sure to subscribe. So that's the end of the video. I've been branching out into a lot more creative tech topics. So also do let me know in the comments what you do want to see from me. But I do have a vision for what type of videos I want to make. I'm pretty excited for where all this stuff is going, and let's see where all this stuff ends up. Anyway, that's the end of the video. I'll see you in the next one.